All right. Hi, everyone. I'll just give us a few seconds here to let everybody trickle in, and then we'll get started. Sometimes Zoom is a little bit slow to let everybody in, so we will just give it another 10 or 20 seconds here. All right. Okay. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Michelle Bertholet, and I am the group publisher of agriculture at Annex Business Media, which is the parent company of Potatoes in Canada. I'm joined today by Dr. Christine Noronha, research scientist in entomology and IPM with Charlottetown Research and Development Center, AAFC, and Anne McRae, senior technical service specialist for horticulture with BASF. Today, during our session, our presenters will speak to managing one of the most challenging pests that we see in potatoes, the Colorado potato beetle, along with new solutions available in the market to control the pest. Special thanks to BASF for sponsoring today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants and attendees approximately 24 hours after our live broadcast. This session is scheduled to run for about 45 to 60 minutes. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the Q&A tab found along the panel on the bottom of your screen. This webinar has also been approved for 1 CCA CEU in integrated pest management. Further instruction for submission via the QR code or by email will be addressed after the final presentation. And that is all I have. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Christine.
Thank you very much. Okay, so today I'm going to give you a brief overview about the Colorado potato beetle and why it is called the superbug. A little bit about the history of this insect. It was first described from the Rocky Mountain area in 1824, feeding on Solanum rostrum, which is nightshade, a relative of potatoes. So that's when it was first described. However, it was not until 1859 when it was first discovered to be feeding on potatoes on a potato crop in Nebraska. And then its eastward movement was pretty quick between 1859 to 1876. By 1876, it was along the Atlantic coast of the U.S. as well as in Canada and Eastern Canada. Since then, it has spread right throughout North America. It's in many different in all the provinces of Canada, as well as it hitchhiked to Europe and spread quite rapidly in Europe, and it's found in many European countries and also in some Asian countries. So it's moved quite rapidly to many different areas in the world. So the Colorado potato beetle, it is considered one of the most important pests of potatoes. It defoliates the plant. Usually, like invasion coming into the fields is usually either by flight or by walking in the spring. These beetles come in. They can fly quite a distance, and the female lays about 500 eggs over a 4-week time span. And so you can imagine how fast the population would grow if each female lays 500 eggs. The other caveat to this is that the beetles and the larvae feed on the potatoes. So they'll feed on the leaves, they'll feed on the stems. And you'll see them in the spring, actually, when you go out to the field, if populations are really high, they defoliate those little tiny plants that are coming out, and right down to the stalks, and they look like as if they'll not survive. But potatoes, I found, are quite resilient, and they do come back. But it does interfere with the growth of these plants, so they can be quite devastating and really damage a field quite quickly. A little bit about the life cycle. So like I said, they come out in the spring, they overwinter. In Canada, they're overwintering in the hedgerows, and so they come out of their overwintering sites, from their overwintering sites, and they'll fly or walk to the potato fields and potato plants, and then the adults will start feeding, and they'll start laying eggs, and eggs are laid on the underside of the leaves. um, Within a week, those eggs will hatch into these little tiny small larvae, and these larvae go through 4 larval instars, so 1 to 4. You're at the on your, I don't know, left or right hand, you see the larvae, the smallest larvae to the largest larvae. You can see that's the 4th instar larvae, and they all feed on the leaves of the potato plants. And then eventually, when the larva has completed its development, the 4th instar will fall to the ground. It'll dig a little bit into the surface, about an inch or so under the soil surface, and make a little cell, and that's where it will pupates for about 10 to 15 days, depending on the temperature, and then the adults come out again. Now, these adults, known as the summer adults, these ones will start feeding again, and they feed quite voraciously because they're preparing to go into diapause for overwintering. So they collect all the fat supplies at that time. So they're feeding quite a lot, and they can do quite a bit of damage at that time to the plants. And then eventually, when they've fed, they have enough fat reserves, they will leave those plants, and they'll either walk or fly to the overwintering sites. Overwintering sites are hedgerows or just along the edge of the field. um, I'll speak a little bit more about that. So the number of generations, generally mostly we have one generation here, and with a partial second. So by partial second, I mean the adults that are coming out, the summer adults that are coming out, they'll come out, and some of them will start laying eggs, and those eggs will hatch, and larvae will develop, and they'll be feeding on the plants. But because of the temperature at that time of the year, it starts to go down. So there's not enough temperature for them to complete their life cycle at that time. So it's just a partial second. Some cases they may complete the entire second, this partial second generation, if the temperatures continue to be warm. But generally, we don't see that. Yet we haven't seen that happen, where usually just a partial second generation. So I was speaking earlier about flying, about where they go. So we did this study in Quebec many years ago, and we put up these traps. They're flight traps, directional flight traps, and they're directional pitfall traps. And we wanted to see when they're coming in and out of the fields. And what we found was in the fall, like around August, they're ready to go to find diapausing sites, overwintering sites. You can see that they mainly move towards the forest. Now this forest was about 300 meters away. So they flew to that distance, 300 to 400 meters. And then we walked to the forest, and you could see them here. You could see this beetle on the tree, and they were all at the edge of the forest on the floor. Forest floor. They were all searching for diapulsing sites. Now we know that they go deep down into the ground. We did some other studies where we found that they can go down to about a meter, and it's all what they do is they will kind of walk around for a little while, empty their gut, and make sure that they don't have, and replace the water in their cells with glycol so that they don't freeze. And that's once that preparation period is over, they will dig into the ground, and they stay just below the frost line. And we did some studies on that as well to see how well they survive the winter. So they'll stay there all winter long. They also walk quite a bit. I did have a graph, but it was not showing up really well today, so I took it out. But we did look at these pitfall traps, and we do see that they walk out of the field. They like to walk, and they walk more than they fly. And the walking is done in the fall as well as in the spring. And flight is usually the temperature and humidity. The temperature and the wind has to be at a particular level before they fly, and they usually fly during the afternoon. So if you're in a field, you might see them flying in the afternoon, early afternoon is what that's when we found them flying. So we know they do that, right? So coming to the damage, so an uncontrolled population can cause 40 to 80% yield reduction. And we know that if 70%, 75% of the foliage is lost, you could have a total crop loss. But that doesn't happen because usually there is an intervention, some kind of intervention to control that population. But if we just leave it, that's what they could do. But that we don't really see that very often. Now, once they come out in the fall and they start feeding on this foliage, they eat all the leaves, and then there's nothing else. But that doesn't stop them. They will start eating the stems. Here you can see them eating the stems. If there's no leaves, they'll eat the stems, and if there's no stems, they'll start going and attacking any potatoes that are exposed. So they'll actually feed on the tubers itself, just in preparation for overwintering. So the main control measure that has been used all these years is insecticides. That's been the main technique used. But the Colorado potato beetle has a very long history of developing resistance, and at one point it developed resistance to all the major old classes of insecticides. And that was in the 80s and the 90s, where resistance development resulted in control failure. And this was in many regions, and it was really difficult to control this insect because there were no new chemicals that were on the market at that time. So growers were quite they had quite a time trying to figure out what to do with this insect. So there was a lot of research done. There's a bug vacuum was it's also called a beetle eater. It's a bug vacuum. It goes over the plants and sucks up the beetles. That way you could get rid of them. People were using flamers to burn the beetles off the plants. Plastic lined trenches were developed and used, and you can see here that any beetles that are walking in and out of the field during the spring and in the fall, this is a really good technique because it traps them in here and they cannot get out. They can walk in, but once they're in, they cannot get out of the trench. It's just the angle of the trench and the material used. So this was a good option for growers. Pathogens, Beauveria bassiana, and predators were also studied, and so these three options are still quite viable options to use in an integrated pest management strategy if being used in the field. These two methods, they're very cumbersome, so they kind of fell off, and it stopped being used once new chemistries were developed for potato beetle control. So let's talk about resistance. So when you talk about resistance, it's always heard rotation of chemicals, and this is the reason why. So if there is a population of beetles, of any insect actually, there's always some individuals in that population who are able to detoxify the chemical that is thrown at it. There's always a few of those insects in the population. So if as let's say a class A insecticide is used, it'll kill off most of the susceptible individuals, and these ones that are able to detoxify remain, and those are the ones that multiply. And if the same chemical is used again, once again, any new susceptible beetles that have joined the population, once again, those are killed off, and the resistant ones are allowed to multiply. So this multiplication happens fast, and in the end, we have resistance developing really fast. However, if you start with a population that has this same type of population, spray chemical A, class A insecticide, you do have some of them. You do, once again, you kill the susceptible ones. The resistant ones are allowed to multiply. But then, if another class of insecticide is sprayed, now you're not only killing the susceptible ones, but you're also killing some of the ones that were resistant to class A insecticide, because they're not resistant to class B. They cannot detoxify class B. So you are killing some of those resistant insects as well. So as a result, the development of resistance to one particular insecticide is delayed. So you have that insecticide remains effective for a much longer period of time. And that's what really the goal is, to use insecticides to delay this onset of resistance. So rotation really is really important. It's the best strategy to delay the development of resistance. And it's important, these insecticides are important to control this insect. So it's important to prolong it as long as we possibly can. I'm going to talk about a study that was recently done. It was published by some colleagues of mine who've done this study on insecticides, looking at the susceptibility to the insecticide. So this is the paper which was published. It's a really interesting paper, and if you get a chance to read it, please do. So what did they find? They looked at populations from Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and PEI, and this study was done from 18 to 22, so over many years. They looked at these populations, and they looked at three different classes. So one was the neonicotinoids, the spinosins, and the diamides. And they classified the population as susceptible if 70%, if they got 70% mortality, less susceptible if it was between 70 and 30%, and resistant if it was over 30% mortality. Less than 30% mortality, it was considered resistant. So if you can see the neonicotinoids, there are populations that are still susceptible, which is really good news. It's good to know. But we also have populations that are less susceptible. There's numbers, and there are populations that are resistant. So we have to be careful. We want these insecticides to last for as long as we possibly can, keep them in the pipeline. So it's good. So this gives us a good idea that resistance is developing within these populations. It's the same with spinosin, excuse me. You can see that there are resistant populations that are less susceptible populations in all these provinces, and the diamides as well. So we can see once again, and there are resistant populations. So this gives us, we should pause and think about how we want to proceed further. And there's always going to be insecticides, new insecticides that are going to come onto the market, and we want all these insecticides to be available to our growers so that they can use them. They have a few more insecticides to use. Now, there's a caveat to potato beetles. Potato beetles are known to develop cross resistance. That's something, and it has happened in the past, and it is the reason why it is called a superbug. It's called a superbug along with, is similar to the diamondback moth, which is also an insect that develops cross resistance. So this is something that we have to be aware of, that it can develop cross resistance. So my colleagues from there who did this study were looking at that, and this is a busy table, but just a little bit here, just to show that, you know, there is some cross resistance that you can see with the diamides and the neonicotinoids. So there is something that's happening between these. So there's a little bit of cross resistance that we can see. So you can see it here, and you can see it here when you look down this longitudinally and horizontally. You can see that there's a little bit of cross resistance that's happening there. So and even with the spinosins, you can see some resistance happening here with interest. So there is cross resistance that's happening. So we have to make sure that we keep these chemicals, and we do have to have a really good plan in place for maintaining these chemicals and keeping the effectiveness of these chemicals. So really the key message that I would like to give here is that, you know, it's very important to have a good resistance management program, and this could be integrated into an IPM program where, you know, I had shown those plastic lined trenches, or even the use of pathogens and predators. So together with that, we could have a good resistance management, insecticide resistance management program. The best way to have an insecticide resistance management plan is to rotate your classes, know the classes, delay that development of resistance. Really important. Insecticides play a big role in IPM. They are part of an IPM strategy, and they should be, we should take care of them and make sure that they are available. The other thing that's really important to do is to do field observations. It's important to know if the chemical that is being sprayed is working or not. So field observations, scouting of fields to make sure that they're actually, you have there's no control failure happening. It's very important. And if there is something that's happening, it's good to get it tested, just to make sure that it's not to help with the resistance management plan. Because if there is something happening, you don't want to spray the same chemical again and again. Definitely going to get resistance. Thank you for listening. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Christine. I'm just going to share my screen here so we can get started. Okay. Okay, perfect. Can you see that okay? I think so. All right. Hi, everyone. As I was introduced in the beginning, I'm Anne McRae. I'm with BASF. Thank you, Christine, for running through all of that information. It was excellent. I'm really glad that I didn't have to witness or have to buy a bug vacuum, although maybe I would have liked to see that just to see how it worked. So I'm actually going to be introducing a new solution for Colorados that's on the market this year, which is very exciting. So Symegra, which some of you may be familiar with, was launched a few years ago as an in-furrow product for wireworms, and we've expanded the label this year to include Colorado potato beetles as a foliar application. So for this presentation, I'm going to take about 10-15 minutes more of your time, and then we can go to questions, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about how this mode of action is unique, also about resistance management, how we can incorporate this into a program to help, maybe allow some of those other insecticides to survive a little bit longer and have a new mode of action for you to use in your rotation, and also show a bit of the trial results and data on how well this product has been working in our trials over the last few years. So I've been fortunate enough as the technical person on our BASF team to take a look at this product for a few years now. It is a new mode of action, so it's a group 30. How it works is it attacks the nervous system. So this video I was able to take, obviously it's hard for me to be able to pull everybody into the field and see what I'm seeing. So I was trying to take a video to sort of demonstrate what we've been seeing in our trials. This particular plot was applied in the evening. The insecticide Symegra was applied in the evening, and I went back the next morning, 12 hours later, and saw that the majority of the beetles had either fallen onto the leaves or onto the ground and were wiggling around. How that works, I'll just take a little bit of time to sort of explain the active ingredient. So this new mode of action is actually the first one registered in Canada for the group 30 classification. It is called a metadiamide. It works similar to other neonics or diamides or other insecticides that will attack the nervous system. The difference is just the site of action. So the insect's nervous system works with these inhibitory and excitatory signals. So those signals have to be going on and off in order for an insect to act normally, to be able to walk and eat and things like that. What Symegra does, if you'll see sort of in the picture here, this is this inhibitory signal. It blocks these channels, and when it blocks those channels, then the insect can no longer control its movements. So as you saw in the video that I just showed, they're wiggling around, they can't feed anymore, and so eventually they die. Typically in the field, you could see them wiggling around like that for a few days, but they will eventually sort of starve to death. To translate that into some of the data that we've looked at, so in this particular trial, there's actually 4 trials here we've looked at all across the country in the major potato growing regions. We looked at both low and high rates of Symegra to kind of address, best applications. We've also compared it to a number of other products on the market, all looking very good. So the nice part is, for the majority of the areas, some of your other insecticides are still working quite well. As far as resistance management goes, as Dr. Noronha said, make sure you're out scouting. If you do notice that the insecticide that you are using is not performing the way it should be, there is a chance you have resistance, and then I would remove that product from sort of your lineup of insecticides. Know what the IRAC classification is. So if it's a diamide, it's a 28. Some of the spinosins would be a group 5. Your neonics or your seed treatments are group 4s. So any of them, there are still some, everybody should still have products on the market that still work. You can now use Symegra in that rotation, so you have something to kind of preserve the use of those 28s and 5s, etc. And it's an excellent option. And as you see, even at the low rate on our label, and I'll get into rates in a second, it still works just as effectively. So that has been the rate, our sort of go-to rate, the one that we've been recommending. If you're familiar with Symegra, as I mentioned, it has been registered for the control of wireworms. This is an in-furrow application. So the first application was done as an in-furrow only to protect for those below ground pests like wireworms. Colorado's will be a foliar application. So it goes from 125 to 187 mils per hectare. That low rate is half the rate of the wireworm application. So you'll get the same jug. We've just updated the label. Your foliar rate is half the rate. A few things to note, because Symegra is not a systemic product, you can use this as an in-furrow and a foliar application because it's not systemic, it doesn't move through the plant, and you are going after two different insect species. So you're going after wireworms in furrow, Colorado's as a foliar. You shouldn't use it more than 2 foliar applications per year, and don't use more than a total of 500 mils per hectare for the season. Symegra is toxic to bees, so it's an excellent insecticide. It also means it can kill some of those things that we would prefer not to kill. So it is best to use this in the evenings if the crop is in bloom, for your stewardship practices, and also to kind of be letting know those beekeepers, if you do have beekeepers in your area, what you are spraying in your fields. Few of the frequently asked questions we get when we're sort of launching a new product is around tank mixes. Symegra has been pretty good tank mix partners for most other insecticides and fungicides and surfactants or anything like that. What we have found is that it should not be tank mixed with any liquid fertilizers. Any of your NPK liquid fertilizers, it tends to create a sediment. So would not recommend tank mixing with those. As I mentioned, Symegra is not systemic, so that works well for the fact that we can use it in furrow and as a foliar. But you have to be aware that because it's not systemic, water volume is important. If you want it to work well, you need excellent coverage of the full plant because those Colorados can be hiding anywhere on that plant. And of course, with storage, we do recommend preventing from freezing, but if the product does happen to freeze, just let it thaw. Shake it up really well and should be good to go. Of course, with any new products, it's important to talk about MRLs. Fortunately, because Symegra was registered already as an in-furrow, we do have MRLs established for the Symegra foliar application. So from that perspective, it is good to go. There are other crops added to the label. Those will not have MRLs, but potatoes and sweet potatoes we do. And just a bit of messaging around insecticide stewardship as well. So this isn't necessarily just for Symegra, but we kind of have been building this information because of the launch of this product, but can apply for any insecticide. Just that it's important to be protecting our environmentally sensitive areas, like your waterways and ponds and creeks and things like that. A number of insecticides can be harmful to aquatic organisms as well as pollinators. So make sure you're paying attention to those buffer zones that are on labels. All labels will have buffer zones to just double check those that you're following the label instructions. Be aware of just where those beehives are, and also vegetative filter strips. So if you're not sure about what a vegetative filter strip is or haven't been told about it before, it's basically just a permanent vegetation area that is between a cultivated field or a field that you're growing anything in and a waterway. Some provinces already have regulations around having permanent vegetative filter strips, anywhere from 10 to 15 meters. And for those provinces that don't, you have to make sure you're reading your labels to know that how wide that needs to be. It's usually due to when your field is sitting higher than your waterway, and you do not want any of that product that eventually leaches into that water. So you need at least a 10-meter buffer that has some sort of vegetation growing. It does not have to be trees necessarily, it could just be sort of grasses, wildflowers, etc. But always important to have. So that kind of wraps up my brief introduction to Symegra. Just some of the key points were that you now have a new unique mode of action, a new tool for resistance management as a group 30 for Symegra. It does provide excellent control, and it's a perfect one to kind of add into your toolbox so that you can not only preserve some of those insecticides that you're currently using, but now have a new one to use as well. So thanks very much for listening to that update. And if there's any questions, I'll turn it back to Michelle, and we have QR code for your CEUs.
Perfect. Thank you both very much for your presentations today. They're very informative. We're going to get into some questions here. But first off, I just want to thank BASF again for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And I have put the QR code instructions in the chat as well. So you can go ahead and scan that through your app, or if you want us to submit it on your behalf, feel free to email your full name and CCA number to webinars@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll submit those for you. And all right, so let's dive into a couple questions here. Got one here first in the chat. Anne, perhaps, well, either one of you could answer that one actually. Will resistance develop faster or slower depending on the stage of the beetle when you're spraying?
I am
Christine
not
is
aware
shaking.
that it will.
No, it wouldn't develop faster if the stage of the beetle. It's just no.
Okay, great, thank you. Another one. What about the activity on the egg masses? What does that look like?
Oh, for Symegra. So yeah, that's a good. I'm not actually aware of any of the products that have activity on the egg masses, Symegra included. It will not kill the eggs. We did do some work to show that if you applied it when there was an egg mass there, and then the egg mass hatched 24 to 48 hours after, that's what was in our trial work anyways, it would then feed on the leaves and then die. So it will work on those first instars as they hatch for, and we believe it is on the plant for sort of 5 to 7 days, but it won't actually kill the eggs.
Okay, all right, good to know. All right, so Christine, how would climate change potentially affect the populations?
Yeah, so climate change, the warmer it gets, right now we're seeing only a partial second generation, but if the warmer temperatures continue into the fall, the possibility of these beetles actually finishing the second, the life cycle, the second set of life cycle, finishing that is high. So that will just increase the population. So it's and also the damage, right? Because if they are there's more eggs laid. If they start to lay more eggs, right now some of them lay eggs, but not all of them. But if that ever happens, they're all going to start laying eggs, so there's going to be a lot more damage. So that's something that we are keeping an eye out on, just to make sure that that this is not what's going to happen in the future. Just keeping an eye on them. Yeah.
Right, okay. How does crop rotation work into control strategy?
Oh, crop rotation doesn't really work very well, and it's mainly because you have to rotate very far. They fly, So because they fly, you have to rotate very far. And most of our fields, if you drive around, they're pretty close to each other. So, you may have a field here, and then if just a short distance away, another field. And although you're rotating within the fields themselves, but the distance is not there, and it's very difficult to have distance between fields. So that's the reason why crop rotation doesn't really work very well for potato beetles.
And let's just revisit, can they feed only on potatoes, or are they interested in other crops as well?
No, they feed on all solanaceous crops. So they'll feed on tomatoes and eggplant. So any plant that's from that family, solanaceous family, they will feed on all those crops.
Okay.
Yes, I'd heard
Thank you.
that some people had planted the odd eggplant that they like them a lot better, and you'll find them in the eggplant before you'll find them in potatoes.
Yes.
If you want to know if they're there.
Yeah,
interesting.
they do. They do like eggplant and peppers and tomatoes. Yeah, they'll go after them.
So then, leading into Semagra, can we use that on other crops other than potatoes?
Yes, so we do the foliar label expansion and did include some other vegetable crops like brassicas and leafies, as well as like in-furrow soil applied for wireworms and sweet potatoes. So yes, I encourage everybody to check out the label if you're curious or have other crops. Just be aware that any of the other vegetable crops that we added, because we did not have them previously, we don't have MRLs established for export. So they can be used here in Canada, but all those crops would have to stay in Canada.
Okay. Is there a threshold used for, when we're looking at control against the Colorado beetle, and where can we find that?
Yes, there is a threshold that was established, and it's a formula that you have to use, and it's called you end up with a CPBE, and I should have put that on, but so you usually when you go into a field, you see egg masses, you see small larvae, large larvae, and adults. So using all that information of how many adults, how many small larvae, how many egg masses, all that, we come up with a formula which is it's just called CPBE. I can always mail it to anyone who wants to know about that, but it is probably in a lot of the scouting books you would find that how to use that formula, and that's what's used. So it's like it takes into account all the stages of the insect. So there is something that can be used.
Oh, perfect. Well, maybe if you want to send that my way after the webinar, we can include it in the follow-up resources
Sure.
for the attendees. And just last question in here before we wrap up. Anne, can you just give us some tips on preventing resistance to Semagra related to the Colorado?
Yes, definitely. So as much as it's exciting having a new product, we don't want to only use that product. There are still others on the market that work really well and that would have a different mode of action. So just be aware when you look at your label, it'll list the IRAC classification. Make sure those, even though there is a lot of products on the market, they don't all necessarily have a different IRAC group. So make sure you're aware of what those are. And then, yes, when you use Semagra, which would be a group 30, then your next application can be a group 28 or a group 5, or one of the others. Or if you have used a neonic on your seed treatment, then make sure all of your foliar applications are not a group 4, that they're other insecticides.
Okay, well, thank you both very much again, and thank you everyone for joining us live. That is our last question for today. So if you have any further questions following the presentation, feel free to reach out to the presenters or to us, and we'll forward you on to the speakers. And as a reminder, the follow-up email will be sent to your inboxes within 24 hours, and that'll hold a recording of the webinar as well as our email again if you need to submit for CCA. And thanks again for tuning in, and don't forget to visit potatoesincanada.com to stay connected. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.